Summer's reckoning. The scream tore through the stillness of the Wyoming plains like a knife through silk. Jack Mercer reined his horse hard, squinting through waves of heat that made the horizon shimmer like water. What he saw stopped his heart. A child no bigger than a fence post, standing over a woman's crumpled body, holding a broken cottonwood branch above her mother's face to block the merciless sun. The woman wasn't moving. The child's dress was stained with dust and something darker. In that moment, Jack knew. Hesitation meant death. If you're drawn to stories of survival, sacrifice, and second chances born under the unforgiving summer sun, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The August sun beat down on the Wyoming territory with the kind of heat that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. Jack Mercer had been careful his whole life, careful with his words, careful with his trust, careful with his heart. 38 years on this earth had taught him that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being smart enough to know when to move and when to stay still. Right now, every instinct told him to move. He urged his buckskin mare forward, the leather reins slick with sweat in his calloused hands. The scream had come from somewhere beyond the ridge, where the grass grew sparse and the soil turned to powder under the relentless sky. Dust rose in small clouds with each hoofbeat, settling on his dark shirt, his worn hat, the rifle strapped to his saddle. When he crested the rise, the scene below struck him like a physical blow. A covered wagon sat abandoned at an awkward angle, one wheel half buried in a shallow ravine. Supplies were scattered across the ground, a trunk with its lid torn open, clothing trampled into the dirt, a water barrel lying on its side with dark stains spreading beneath it. But it was the two figures that held his attention. The child couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her blonde hair hung in tangled knots around a face smudged with dirt and tears. Her calico dress, once perhaps light blue, was now brown with dust and marked with rusty streaks that Jack recognized immediately as dried blood. She stood with her feet planted wide, holding a broken tree branch over the woman lying motionless on the ground. The woman's dark hair was matted with sweat and blood. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a wound that had been crudely wrapped with strips of fabric. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. Jack dismounted before his mare had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. The child's head snapped toward him, and he saw the terror flash across her small face. She didn't run. Instead, she widened her stance and raised the branch like a weapon, her thin arms trembling with the effort. "Stay back," the girl said, her voice cracking. "Don't you touch her." Jack raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt anyone." "That's what they said." The child's blue eyes were red-rimmed but fierce. "The men who came. They said they just wanted water." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough in his years to know what that meant. "How long ago?" 2 days, maybe 3. The girl swayed slightly, and Jack realized she was fighting to stay upright. "I can't remember. It's so hot." "Where's your father?" The branch dipped. "Dead. They shot him when he tried to stop them." The words were delivered with the flat effect of shock, the kind Jack had heard from soldiers who'd seen too much, too fast. No child should sound like that. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emma." She licked cracked lips. "Emma Wright. This is my mama, Sarah." "I'm Jack Mercer. I've got a ranch about 5 miles west of here." He took a careful step forward. "Emma, your mama needs help. Real help. The kind I can give her, but only if you let me." The girl studied him with an intensity that seemed far too old for her age. Jack could see her weighing his words, searching his face for lies. Finally, the branch lowered. "She won't wake up," Emma whispered. "I tried. I keep trying." Jack closed the distance between them and knelt beside Sarah Wright. The heat radiating from her skin told him what he needed to know even before he checked her pulse, weak and rapid beneath his fingers. Infection. Dehydration. Possibly internal injuries from the attack. Out here, any one of those could kill. He looked up at Emma. "How long has she been like this?" "Since yesterday morning. She was talking before that. Told me to stay with her. told me not to leave her." Fresh tears cut tracks through the dirt on Emma's cheeks. "I didn't leave her. I stayed." "You did good," Jack said, meaning it. "You kept her shaded. That might have saved her life." He stood and moved to his horse, pulling his canteen free. When he returned, he carefully lifted Sarah's head and wet her lips. Most of the water ran down her chin, but some made it into her mouth. She didn't respond. "We need to move her," Jack said. "Get her somewhere cool, somewhere I can treat her proper." "Where?" Emma asked. "My ranch. It's not fancy, but it's got walls and a roof and a well with cold water." He glanced at the scattered supplies. "Can you gather what's salvageable? Food, blankets, anything that might be useful?" Emma nodded and immediately set to work, moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. Jack watched her for a moment, then turned his attention to the more pressing problem. Sarah Wright was slight, but dead weight was always heavier than it looked. He managed to get her across his saddle, securing her as best he could with rope. Emma appeared at his elbow with a canvas bag stuffed with items. "Can you ride?" Jack asked. "Papa was teaching me." "Good enough." He lifted her onto the mare behind the saddle. "Hold on to my belt. Don't let go for anything." The ride back to the ranch was the longest 5 miles of Jack's life. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something that shimmered and burned. Sarah's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute. Emma's small hands gripped his belt so tightly he could feel her knuckles digging into his back. When the ranch house finally came into view, a low structure of weathered wood with a barn and corral behind it, Jack felt something loosen in his chest. They'd made it this far. He carried Sarah inside, Emma following so close she was practically stepping on his heels. The interior of the house was dim and blessedly cooler than outside. He laid Sarah on his own bed, the only real bed in the place, and immediately went to work. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, watching as Jack stripped away the makeshift bandages on her mother's shoulder. The wound beneath was angry and red, radiating heat, infection, just as he'd suspected. "Emma, I need you to help me," Jack said without looking up. "Can you do that?" "What do you need?" "There's a well outside. I need cold water, as much as you can carry." He pointed to a row of buckets near the door. "Fill those, bring them here." The girl moved immediately, grateful perhaps to have a task. Jack worked methodically, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Sarah's unconscious body jerk. He packed it with a poultice of yarrow and comfrey he kept for his horses. It worked on people just as well. By the time Emma returned with the first bucket, he was wrapping fresh bandages. "Good," he said. "Set it there. Now go get another." They worked in tandem as the afternoon bled into evening. Jack sponged Sarah's burning skin with cold water, trying to bring her fever down. Emma fetched and carried, her face set in grim determination. Neither of them spoke beyond what was necessary. As the sun finally began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Sarah's fever broke. The tension drained from Jack's shoulders when he felt her skin cool beneath his hand. She wasn't out of danger, but she'd cleared the first hurdle. Emma sat slumped against the wall, her eyes half closed. Jack realized the child hadn't eaten or had water herself in hours, maybe longer. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Emma blinked slowly. "I don't remember." Jack moved to the kitchen, little more than a corner of the main room with a cast-iron stove and a few rough shelves. He built up the fire and set coffee to boil, then pulled out the remains of yesterday's cornbread and some dried venison. Simple food, but it was what he had. He brought it to Emma on a tin plate. "Eat." She took the plate but didn't move to touch the food. "Is Mama going to die?" The question hung in the air between them. Jack could have lied, could have offered easy comfort. But something about the way Emma looked at him, with those two old eyes and that small face, told him she deserved the truth. "I don't know," he said. "She's fighting. That's all we can ask for right now." Emma nodded slowly, then picked up a piece of cornbread. She ate mechanically, chewing and swallowing without seeming to taste anything. Jack poured himself coffee and sat in the chair by the bed, watching Sarah's chest rise and fall. The rhythm was steadier now, more regular, a good sign. "Why did you help us?" Emma asked suddenly. Jack turned to look at her. "What kind of question is that?" "Mama said most people don't help unless there's something in it for them." Emma's voice was matter of fact. "What's in it for you?" Nothing. Jack took a sip of coffee, bitter and black. Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do. Papa used to say that. Emma's lower lip trembled. He said there was still good people in the world, even when Mama said there wasn't. Your mama had reason to be cautious, sounds like. She didn't want to come west. Emma set down the plate, most of the food untouched. She wanted to stay in St. Louis, but Papa said there was opportunity out here. Land. A future. Her voice dropped to a whisper. There's no future anymore. Jack wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there was always a future, that things would get better. But the words stuck in his throat, tasting too much like lies. Instead, he said, "Get some rest. You can sleep in the loft. There's blankets up there. I want to stay with Mama. She needs quiet, and you need sleep." Emma's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Jack of his own sister, dead these 15 years. I'm not leaving her. Jack recognized when a battle wasn't worth fighting. Fine, but you sleep, I'll watch her. Emma curled up on the floor beside the bed, using her canvas bag as a pillow. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. Jack sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the night sounds filtering through the windows. Crickets, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through dry grass. Sarah Wright stirred occasionally, mumbling words he couldn't make out. Each time, he checked her fever, gave her water, adjusted the bandages. Somewhere around midnight, her eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, confusion clouding her features. Then her head turned, taking in the unfamiliar room, and panic flared across her face. "Emma!" she gasped, trying to sit up. "Where's—" "She's here." Jack moved into her line of sight, keeping his voice low, right beside the bed. "She's safe. You're both safe." Sarah's gaze found her daughter, and something in her expression crumpled. Where? My ranch. I found you on the plains. You've been unconscious for about 12 hours. She tried again to rise, and this time Jack helped her, propping her up with pillows. Her face was pale except for 2 fever-bright spots on her cheeks, and she moved with the careful stiffness of someone in pain. "The men," she said. "Did they—" "Gone. Long gone, from what Emma told me." Sarah closed her eyes. "Thomas, my husband. They killed him. I'm sorry. They wanted money. We didn't have any." Her voice was hollow. "Thomas tried to fight them. They shot him. Then they went through our things. When they didn't find what they wanted, they—" She touched her shoulder gingerly. "One of them cut me, said it was to teach me not to waste their time." Rage, cold and sharp, settled in Jack's gut. "How many?" 3, maybe 4. I was trying to shield Emma. I couldn't—" Her breath hitched. "I couldn't stop them from taking everything." "You stopped them from taking what mattered," Jack said. "Your daughter is alive. You're alive. Because of you." Sarah looked at him properly for the first time. "Why did you help us? You don't know us." It was the second time that night someone had asked him that question. Jack wondered what kind of world they'd been living in, where kindness required explanation. "Like I told Emma, it was the right thing to do." Sarah studied his face in the lamplight. "Thank you," she said finally. I can't." Her voice broke. "Thank you." Jack stood, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You need rest and food when you're able. We'll talk more in the morning." He moved toward the door, intending to sleep in the barn, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Mr. Mercer?" "Jack?" "Jack?" She hesitated. "The men who did this, if they come back—" "They won't," Jack said with certainty. "And if they're fool enough to try, they'll regret it." He stepped out into the night, letting the door close softly behind him. The air had cooled, and stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon, vast and indifferent. Jack stood on the porch for a long moment, listening to the silence. In all his years alone on this ranch, he'd convinced himself he preferred solitude. It was simpler, safer. People complicated things, brought trouble and pain and expectations he'd never learned how to meet. But tonight, standing under the endless Wyoming sky with 2 strangers sleeping in his house, Jack felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't quite name but recognized as dangerous nonetheless. He'd saved their lives today. That was supposed to be the end of it. Somehow, though, he suspected it was only the beginning. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of careful nursing and cautious recovery. Sarah's fever returned twice more, each time less severe than before, and Jack treated it with the same methodical attention he gave to everything else. Emma rarely left her mother's side, though Jack caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. On the fourth morning, Sarah was strong enough to sit at the table for breakfast. Jack had made Johnny cakes and fried salt pork. Simple fare, but Sarah ate like it was a feast. "You're a good cook," she said, surprising him. "It's edible. That's about all I aim for." "That's more than I managed on the trail." Sarah's smile was tentative. "Everything I made tasted like smoke and desperation." Emma giggled, the first time Jack had heard the sound, and Sarah's face softened. She reached over to smooth her daughter's tangled hair, a gesture so tender it made Jack look away. After breakfast, Sarah insisted on helping with the dishes despite Jack's protests. They worked in companionable silence, and Jack found himself acutely aware of her presence in his space, the rustle of her skirt, the faint scent of the lavender soap he'd given her to wash with, the careful way she moved to favor her injured shoulder. "I've been thinking," Sarah said as she dried the last plate. "We need to move on, find a town, get word to Thomas's family." Jack's hands stilled in the wash basin. "You're in no condition to travel. I can't impose on you forever. You're not imposing." "Jack." She set down the plate and turned to face him. "You've been more than kind, more than generous. But Emma and I, we need to figure out what comes next. Where we go from here." "Where will you go?" The question hung between them. Sarah's jaw tightened. "I don't know. Back east, perhaps. Thomas had a brother in Ohio." "You got money for passage?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "The men took everything," Sarah said finally. "Every cent we had. The land deed Thomas was carrying, all of it." "Then you can't leave," Jack said bluntly. "Not until you've got the means to." "I can work. You can heal." Jack's voice came out harsher than he intended. "You can let that shoulder mend proper. You can let your daughter stop looking over her shoulder every 5 minutes. He forced himself to soften his tone. "You can stay here until you're ready. Both of you." Sarah searched his face. "Why are you doing this?" Jack dried his hands on a towel, buying time to find the right words. "I've been alone on this ranch for 8 years. Built it from nothing, worked it by myself. I chose that. Chose the quiet." He met her eyes. "But choosing to be alone is different from standing by when people need help. I might prefer solitude, but I'm not heartless." "I never thought you were." Then stop questioning it and just accept it." Sarah's lips curved in a small smile. "You're a stubborn man, Jack Mercer." "So I've been told." Emma appeared in the doorway, holding a book she'd found on one of Jack's shelves. "Mama, can Mr. Mercer teach me to read this?" Sarah's expression shifted to something complicated. "Emma, that's not—" "I'll teach her," Jack said, before he could think better of it. Both Sarah and Emma turned to stare at him. "You will?" Emma's eyes were wide. "If your mama doesn't mind." Jack shrugged, feeling unaccountably self-conscious. "I've got the time. And books just sit there gathering dust if nobody reads them." Emma looked at her mother with such hope that Sarah's resistance visibly crumbled. "If Mr. Mercer is willing, then yes, but you have to promise to mind him and not be a bother." "I promise!" Emma clutched the book to her chest. "Can we start now?" "After your mama rests," Jack said. "And after you help him collect eggs from the hen house." Emma nodded eagerly and darted outside. Through the window, Jack could see her running toward the chicken coop with more energy than he'd seen from her since that first day. "She likes you," Sarah said quietly. "She's a good kid." "She is." Sarah's voice caught. "Thomas would have—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "He would have liked you too." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he moved toward the door. "I've got work to do. You should rest like I told Emma." "Jack?" He paused, hand on the doorframe. "Thank you," Sarah said, "for giving her something to look forward to. She hasn't smiled like that since before," Jack finished when she couldn't. Sarah nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Jack left her there and went outside, where the sun was climbing toward its zenith and the heat was building like pressure in a kettle. He had fence to mend, horses to tend, 100 tasks that came with running a ranch alone. But for the first time in 8 years, his house didn't feel empty when he walked away from it. That night, after supper, Jack kept his promise. He sat with Emma at the table, the lamplight pooling around them, and opened the book she'd chosen, a worn copy of McGuffey's Reader that had belonged to his sister. Emma traced the letters with her finger, sounding out words with intense concentration. Jack corrected her gently when she stumbled, praised her when she got it right. Sarah sat in the rocking chair by the cold fireplace, mending one of Emma's dresses, but he could feel her attention on them. "Why is the K silent in knife?" Emma demanded, frustration creeping into her voice. "Because English doesn't make sense half the time," Jack said. "You just have to remember it." "That's stupid." "Emma," Sarah's voice was sharp. "Mind your tongue." "But it is stupid," Emma insisted, though her voice was smaller now. Jack bit back a smile. "Can't argue with that. But stupid or not, it's what we've got." Emma scowled at the page for a moment, then tried again. This time, she got the sentence right, and her face lit up with triumph. They worked for another hour before Emma's yawns became too frequent to ignore. Sarah tucked her daughter into the loft, and Jack heard them talking in low voices. Prayers, he realized, though he couldn't make out the words. When Sarah came back down, she found him standing at the window, looking out at the darkness. "She's asleep," Sarah said. "Finally. She's bright, learns quick. Thomas wanted her to have an education, said it was important, especially for a girl." Sarah came to stand beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. "He had all these plans. A house with a real floor, land of our own, maybe a store one day. He sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Sarah's reflection in the glass showed her wiping her eyes. "He deserved better than dying on the side of a road in the middle of nowhere." "Nobody deserves that." They stood in silence for a while, the night pressing in around the small circle of lamplight. "Jack," Sarah said eventually, "what you're doing for us, letting us stay, teaching Emma, all of it. I know it's not nothing. I know it disrupts your life. Life needs disrupting sometimes. Even so." She turned to face him fully. "I want you to know it matters. You matter, to both of us." Jack felt something tighten in his chest. "You should rest. Your shoulder is healing fine, thanks to you." She didn't move. "I'm serious, Jack. Whatever happens next, wherever Emma and I end up, I'll never forget what you've done." "Nothing to forget," Jack said gruffly. "Now get some sleep before that daughter of yours is up with the sun demanding more lessons." Sarah smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her, one that reached her eyes and softened the hard edges that grief had carved into her face. "Good night, Jack." "Night." He waited until she'd climbed the ladder to the loft before he extinguished the lamp and stepped out onto the porch. The stars were out again, brilliant and cold, and a slight breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dry grass. Jack sat in the chair he'd built years ago, weathered now and comfortable with age, and let his mind wander. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about the way the house felt different with them in it, fuller somehow, though they took up hardly any space. He thought about Emma's laughter and Sarah's smile and the strange, unsettling warmth in his chest when he'd heard them. He'd been alone by choice for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be needed. To have someone depend on him for more than just fixing a wagon wheel or selling a horse. It was dangerous, that feeling, because people left, through death or distance or simple change of heart. Jack had learned that lesson well enough. The smart thing would be to keep his distance, help them get back on their feet, and send them on their way before he got too used to having them around. But when had Jack Mercer ever done the smart thing when it came to lost causes? He sat there until the moon rose, full and bright, turning the plain silver. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and his horses shifted restlessly in the corral. Inside the house, 2 people were sleeping under his roof, safe and sheltered. For tonight, that would be enough. The morning brought with it a rider. Jack was in the barn mucking out stalls while Emma fed the chickens when he heard the sound of hooves on hard-packed earth. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the wall, but he forced himself to relax when he saw it was just one man, well-dressed, riding a fine sorrel gelding that looked too clean for trail work. The stranger dismounted near the porch, dusting off his suit jacket with careful precision. He was perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen. A leather satchel hung across his chest, and his boots shone despite the dust. Jack stepped out of the barn, the rifle now casually held in the crook of his arm. "Help you with something?" The man turned, and his smile was all politeness with nothing warm behind it. "Good morning. I'm looking for Jack Mercer. Would that be you?" "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Chester Whitmore. I'm an attorney from Cheyenne." He reached into his jacket, and Jack's grip tightened on the rifle until Whitmore pulled out a card, not a weapon. "I represent the Caldwell family of Boston. I believe you may have information relevant to a matter I'm investigating." Jack took the card but didn't look at it. "Don't know any Caldwells." "Perhaps not by name." Whitmore's eyes drifted past Jack toward the house. "But I have reason to believe you may have encountered a woman and child traveling west. Sarah and Emma Wright?" Every instinct Jack had honed over 38 years screamed danger. He kept his face neutral. "What's your interest in them?" "I'm afraid that's confidential client business." Whitmore's smile never wavered. "But I can assure you the Caldwell family has only the child's best interests at heart. Emma is, you see, their granddaughter." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Jack processed this information, turning it over in his mind like a card player checking for marks on the deck. "That is so?" "Indeed. Mrs. Sarah Wright is the daughter of Victoria Caldwell, though they've been estranged for some years. When the family learned of the tragedy that befell Sarah's husband, they became quite concerned for the welfare of their granddaughter." Whitmore pulled a folded paper from his satchel. "This is a court order granting temporary custody to the Caldwell family, pending a full hearing." Jack didn't take the paper. "Seems odd they'd be so concerned when they've been estranged for years." "Family is family, Mr. Mercer. Surely you understand that bonds of blood supersede past disagreements. And if the mother doesn't want to give up her child?" Whitmore's expression shifted, something harder showing through the professional veneer. "Mrs. Wright is in no position to provide for the child. She's destitute, widowed, and by all accounts injured. The Caldwells can offer Emma education, security, and a future befitting her station." "Her station," Jack repeated flatly. "The child is the heir to a considerable fortune, Mr. Mercer. Surely even you can see she deserves better than a life of poverty and hardship." The door to the house opened, and Sarah stepped out onto the porch. She'd been getting stronger each day, moving with less pain, but now all the color drained from her face as she took in the scene. "Chester Whitmore," she said, and her voice carried the weight of old fear. "I should have known Mother would send you." Whitmore's smile widened. "Sarah, how delightful to see you looking so well, considering your recent ordeal. What do you want?" "I think you know." He held up the court order. "Your mother is prepared to provide Emma with everything she needs. All you have to do is be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what she called it when she tried to force me to marry the man she chose, when she cut me off for choosing Thomas, when she told me I was dead to her." She descended the porch steps, and Jack could see her hands shaking. "I won't let you take my daughter. I'm afraid it's not your choice to make." Whitmore's tone remained pleasant, which somehow made his words worse. "The law is quite clear. A mother in your circumstances, no income, no prospects, no permanent residence, is in no position to care for a child. The court will side with the Caldwells." Emma appeared in the doorway, her small face pinched with confusion and fear. "Mama?" Sarah's composure cracked. "Go back inside, sweetheart." "But now, Emma." The girl retreated, but Jack could see her shadow through the window, watching. Whitmore cleared his throat. "There's no need for this to become unpleasant. The Caldwells are prepared to be generous. They'll cover all your medical expenses, provide you with a settlement, and allow you supervised visits once you've stabilized your situation." "How generous," Sarah said, her voice like ice. "They'll pay me to give up my child, and then let me see her when it's convenient for them. They're offering you a fresh start. Without the burden of a child, you could rebuild your life, find employment, perhaps remarry eventually. Emma is not a burden." "Of course not." Whitmore's patience was clearly wearing thin. But sentiment aside, you must consider what's best for the child. The Caldwells can provide. I know what they can provide, Sarah interrupted. I grew up in that house. I know exactly what kind of life Emma would have. She'd be dressed in expensive clothes and taught to sit still and speak only when spoken to. She'd learn which fork to use and how to curtsy, and that her worth is measured by her marriage prospects. Her voice broke. She'd learn that love is conditional and that family is about appearances, not affection. I won't do that to her. Jack had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Whitmore and Sarah. Seems to me the lady has made her position clear. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. And who exactly are you, Mr. Mercer? What is your relationship to Mrs. Wright? I'm the man on whose property you're standing. Ah, yes, the Good Samaritan. Whitmore's lip curled. Tell me, what does a man like you expect in return for his charity? A woman alone, grateful, perhaps pliable? Jack's hand tightened on the rifle. Watch your mouth. I'm simply pointing out that your motives may be questioned. A single woman residing with an unmarried man, no chaperone. It doesn't look good, does it? One might wonder about the propriety of the situation. Sarah's face flushed. How dare you? I dare because I'm thinking of the child. Whitmore slipped the court order back into his satchel. You have 1 week to respond to the petition, Mrs. Wright. If you contest it, there will be a hearing in Cheyenne. I strongly suggest you consider the inevitable outcome before you put yourself and your daughter through that ordeal. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. Good day to you both. They watched him ride away, dust rising in his wake. Sarah stood rigid, her arms wrapped around herself. Jack could see her fighting to hold herself together, the same way he'd seen soldiers do after battles, everything pressed down tight until they were alone. Sarah, don't. She held up a hand. Just don't. She walked back into the house, her steps careful and measured. Through the window, Jack saw her gather Emma into her arms, holding her daughter like she might disappear if Sarah loosened her grip. Jack stood on the porch for a long time, thinking. Then he saddled his horse and rode toward town. The town of Bitter Creek wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings that served the scattered ranches and homesteads in the territory. But it had one thing Jack needed: a telegraph office. The operator, a thin man named Albert with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up when Jack entered. Jack Mercer, don't usually see you in town midweek. Need to send a telegram. Where to? Jack pulled a piece of paper from his pocket where he'd written down the information from Whitmore's card. Cheyenne, law offices of Porter and Associates. Albert raised his eyebrows but didn't comment. He copied down Jack's message, charged him for it, and promised to send it within the hour. Jack's next stop was the land office, where he spent 20 minutes with the clerk reviewing property records. Then he visited the general store, bought supplies he didn't need, and listened to the gossip flowing around him like water around rocks. By the time he rode back to the ranch, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Sarah was sitting on the porch steps, watching Emma play with a kitten one of the barn cats had brought around. Where did you go? Sarah asked as he dismounted. Had business in town. Jack unsaddled his horse, taking his time with the task. Need to talk to you about something. Sarah's expression shuddered. If it's about what Whitmore said, it's not. Jack led his horse to the corral and returned to the porch. Can Emma go inside for a bit? Sarah studied his face, then called to her daughter. Emma, honey, why don't you go wash up for supper? But, Mama... Now, please... Emma reluctantly carried the kitten inside. When the door closed behind her, Sarah turned back to Jack. What is it? Jack sat on the step beside her, leaving space between them. I did some checking today. Whitmore's legitimate. He really is working for your mother, and that court order is real. Sarah's shoulders sagged. So it's over. I didn't say that. Jack pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I also talked to a lawyer in Cheyenne named Porter, used to practice back east before he came out here. He knows the law, knows how these things work. Jack, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely afford to feed myself and Emma. Didn't ask you to pay for it. Jack handed her the paper. Porter owes me a favor. He said he'd look at your case, no charge. Sarah unfolded the telegram reply Jack had received just before leaving town. Her eyes scanned the words, then stopped, going back to read them again. He thinks I might have a chance? He thinks the Caldwell's case isn't as strong as they're making it sound. They're estranged from you. They've shown no interest in Emma until now, and they're basically arguing that money is more important than a mother's love. Jack leaned back against the porch post. Porter says judges don't like rich people trying to buy children, even when it's dressed up as concern. But the hearing is in Cheyenne. How would I even get there? What about Emma? What about... Sarah pressed her hands to her face. This is impossible. Nothing's impossible, just difficult. You don't understand, my mother, she doesn't lose. She spent her whole life getting exactly what she wants, and what she wants now is Emma. Sarah lowered her hands, and her eyes were bright with tears. She'll paint me as an unfit mother. She'll bring up every mistake I ever made, every time I defied her, every reason she had to disown me. And she'll win, because she always wins. Not this time. Sarah looked at him. How can you be so sure? Because this time, she's not just fighting you. Jack met her gaze steadily. You've got someone standing with you. You. It wasn't a question. Me. Why? Sarah's voice cracked. Why would you do this? Risk your reputation, spend your money, involve yourself in my family's mess? What possible reason could you have? Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma through the window as she set the table for supper. 8 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter. Fever took them both within a week. After that, I figured I was done with family, done with caring about anyone except myself. He turned back to Sarah. But then I found you and Emma on that plane, and something in me woke up that I thought was dead. Maybe it's selfish, wanting to hold on to that feeling, or maybe it's just that I know what it's like to lose everything, and I'll be damned if I stand by and watch it happen to someone else when I can prevent it. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face, unchecked. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just let me help. She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay. Okay, we'll fight this. Together. Emma opened the door, her face worried. Mama? Are you sad? Sarah stood and went to her daughter, kneeling to look her in the eye. No, sweetheart, I'm not sad. I'm grateful. For what? For Jack, for this place, for still being here with you. She cupped Emma's face in her hands. And I'm going to make sure we stay together, no matter what. Emma threw her arms around her mother's neck. Over the child's shoulder, Sarah's eyes met Jack's, and he saw in them a mix of fear and determination and something else he couldn't quite name. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah and Jack sat at the table going over everything Porter had written in his follow-up telegram. The lawyer had been thorough, outlining the arguments the Caldwells would likely make and the counter-arguments Sarah could present. He wants character witnesses, Sarah said, reading from the paper. People who can testify that I'm a fit mother, that Emma is well cared for. I'll testify. Jack, if you do that, they'll tear you apart. They'll imply things about our relationship, about your motives. Whitmore already started down that road. Let them. Jack's jaw set. I'll tell the truth, that I found you in Emma, that I've watched you care for your daughter, that anyone with eyes can see she's loved and safe. It won't be enough, not against my mother's lawyers, her money, her influence. Then we find more witnesses, the people in town who've seen you at the general store, the minister, if you've been to church. Sarah shook her head. I haven't. We've barely left the ranch. Then we change that. Jack stood and paced to the window. Starting tomorrow, we go to town together. We let people see you and Emma, see how you are with her. We build a record that shows you're not some helpless widow, but a strong woman doing her best for her child. And if it's not enough? Jack turned to face her. Then we'll find another way. But we don't give up before we've even started. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the telegram. There's something else Porter mentioned, at the bottom. Jack came back to the table and looked where she was pointing. The last line of the telegram read, Marriage would strengthen case considerably. Court favors intact families. The word hung between them like smoke. He's right, Sarah said softly. If I were married, My mother's argument falls apart. I wouldn't be a destitute widow with no prospects. I'd have a husband, a home, stability. Sarah, I'm not suggesting anything, she said quickly. I would never ask that of you. I needed to acknowledge it. That there's a solution we're not considering. Jack sat down heavily. It's not that simple. I know, marriage should be about love, about building a life together, not about legal strategy. She folded the telegram carefully. Forget I mentioned it. But Jack couldn't forget it. The idea lodged itself in his mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. Marriage to Sarah would solve the immediate problem, yes, but it would also change everything. His life, his carefully maintained solitude, the walls he'd built around his heart after losing Anne and Lily. Yet when he thought about Sarah and Emma leaving, about them being dragged back to Boston into a life that would crush them both, something in him rebelled against it with a force that surprised him. What if it wasn't just legal strategy? He heard himself say. Sarah's head snapped up. What? Jack ran a hand through his hair, feeling like he was stepping off a cliff into darkness. What if we approached it differently? Not as a business arrangement, but as two people building something real. Jack, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. But I've been alone for 8 years, and in that time, I convinced myself it was what I wanted. These past weeks, though, having you and Emma here, it's made me realize maybe I was just afraid of losing someone again, of caring and having it ripped away. Sarah's eyes were wide. What are you saying? I'm saying that if we're going to do this, if we're going to fight your mother and win, we should do it right. Not a marriage of convenience that we both resent, but a real partnership. He met her gaze. I'm saying I'd like the chance to see what we could build together, if you're willing. You barely know me. I know you're strong. I know you'd die before you let anything happen to Emma. I know you're stubborn and proud and kind. Jack's voice softened. I know being around you feels like coming back to life after being dead for a long time. Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed them flat on the table. This is crazy. Probably. We should think about it. Take time to... Time is exactly what we don't have. Whitmore gave you a week. That's not enough time to decide to marry someone. People used to decide in less. Jack reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. I'm not asking you to love me, Sarah. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you. Let me be the wall between Emma and whatever your mother tries to do. Let me give you both the protection of my name and this ranch. And what do you get out of it? The question was fair. Jack considered it carefully. A family, a second chance, a reason to care about something beyond just surviving day to day. Sarah's eyes glistened. I can't offer you much. I'm broken, Jack. Thomas's death, everything that happened, it broke something in me. I don't know if I can be what a wife should be. Then we'll both be broken together and figure it out as we go. She laughed, though it came out more like a sob. This is the most insane conversation I've ever had. Is that a yes? It's a... Sarah took a shaky breath. It's a maybe. I need to think. I need to pray on it. I need to... Emma's voice drifted down from the loft, calling for her mother. Sarah stood immediately, but she looked back at Jack before climbing the ladder. Thank you, she said. For offering, for caring, for everything. Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He listened to Sarah's soft voice as she comforted Emma back to sleep, then sat alone in the lamplight, wondering what the hell he'd just done. He'd offered to marry a woman he'd known for less than a month, a woman carrying the weight of grief and trauma, with a child who'd witnessed her father's murder. He'd offered to step into the middle of a family war with people who had money and power, and no scruples about using both. By any measure, it was the most reckless thing he'd done since coming to Wyoming. But when he thought about the alternative, watching Sarah and Emma ride away, knowing they were heading into a battle they couldn't win, reckless felt like the only sane choice. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Sarah came down from the loft earlier than usual, her hair neatly braided, her face composed. She found Jack already dressed, drinking coffee on the porch. I have an answer, she said without preamble. Jack set down his cup. All right. If we do this, we do it with honesty. No false promises, no pretending to feel things we don't. Sarah's voice was steady. We're partners working toward a common goal, keeping Emma safe and building a life that works for all of us. If affection grows from that, fine. If not, we're still committed to making it work. Agreed. I need you to understand what you're taking on. My mother won't stop with the custody battle. She'll try to destroy you, ruin your reputation, make your life hell. Let her try, Sarah almost smiled. You don't know her. And she doesn't know me. Jack stood. So is that a yes? It's a yes. She held out her hand. Partners? Jack took her hand, her skin warm against his. Partners. They shook on it like they were sealing a business deal, but when Jack looked into Sarah's eyes, he saw something there beyond simple agreement, a spark of hope, fragile and fierce at the same time. When? Sarah asked. Soon as possible. I'll ride to town today, talk to the minister, arrange it for this week. Jack. Sarah squeezed his hand before releasing it. Are you sure? He wasn't, not even a little, but he said, yes, and meant it enough to make it true. 3 days later, Jack stood in front of the cracked mirror in his bedroom, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in 8 years. His hands fumbled with the knot, muscle memory fighting against disuse. The black suit smelled faintly of cedar from the trunk where it had been stored, and the fabric pulled tight across shoulders that had broadened from years of ranch work. Through the thin wall, he could hear Sarah helping Emma get ready. The girl's excited chatter mixed with her mother's quieter responses, creating a rhythm that had become familiar in the short time they'd been here. Jack's stomach twisted with something he couldn't quite name. Anticipation mixed with dread, hope tangled with fear. A knock on the door frame made him turn. Sarah stood there in a dress he'd never seen before, pale blue with small flowers embroidered at the collar. She must have made it from fabric she'd salvaged from the wagon because he knew she hadn't bought anything new. Her dark hair was pinned up, showing the graceful line of her neck, and for a moment Jack forgot how to breathe. You look terrified, Sarah said, a small smile playing at her lips. I look like a man who can't tie a damn tie. She crossed the room and reached up to fix his collar. Her fingers were gentle and sure, and Jack held very still, acutely aware of how close she was, the faint scent of lavender soap and something uniquely her. There, she said, stepping back, almost presentable. You look... Jack searched for words and came up short. Beautiful. Color rose in Sarah's cheeks. Thank you. Emma helped me with the buttons. My shoulder's still not quite... She stopped, took a breath. I'm nervous. Me too. What if we're making a mistake? The question hung between them, honest and raw. Jack could have offered reassurance, could have listed all the logical reasons this made sense. Instead, he told her the truth. Maybe we are, but it's our mistake to make, and we're making it for the right reasons. Sarah nodded slowly. Emma keeps asking if you're going to be her papa now. What did you tell her? That you're going to be her stepfather, that you care about her and want to keep her safe. Sarah's voice wavered slightly. She asked if that meant you loved us. Jack's chest tightened. What did you say? I said that love comes in different forms, and that sometimes the people who show up when you need them most are the ones who matter. She met his eyes. Was that all right? That was perfect. A shout from the other room announced Emma's impatience. Sarah touched Jack's arm briefly, then turned away. We should go. Reverend Collins will be waiting. The ride to town was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Emma sat between them on the wagon seat, swinging her legs and humming to herself, oblivious to the weight of what was about to happen. The summer heat pressed down like a heavy hand, and dust rose in clouds behind the wagon wheels. Bitter Creek looked the same as it always did, a handful of buildings baking under the relentless sun, a few people moving slowly through the thick air. But today it felt different to Jack, like he was seeing it through new eyes. This was the town where his life would change, where he'd take vows he'd never expected to take again. Reverend Collins was waiting at the small church, along with his wife Martha and Albert from the telegraph office. Jack had asked Albert to serve as witness, and the man had agreed with barely concealed curiosity. Now he stood near the altar, trying not to stare too obviously. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Wright, Reverend Collins greeted them warmly. He was a kind man in his 60s with white hair and weathered hands that spoke of years of frontier ministry. And young Miss Emma, don't you look lovely? Emma beamed and twirled, making her dress flare out. Sarah rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder, steadying her. Shall we begin? The Reverend asked. Jack nodded, his throat suddenly dry. They moved to stand before the simple altar, Emma between them. Martha Collins took the girl's hand, leading her to sit in the front pew, and whispered something that made Emma giggle. Then it was just Jack and Sarah facing each other while Reverend Collins opened his worn Bible. Dearly beloved, he began, and the familiar words washed over Jack like water over stone. He'd heard them before, had spoken similar vows to Anne in a church back in Missouri that seemed a lifetime ago. But this was different. No love-struck youth here, no romantic illusions, just two people trying to build something solid from the wreckage of their separate losses. When it came time for the vows, Jack spoke clearly, meaning every word, even as he wondered if he could live up to them. Sarah's voice was steadier than he'd expected, her hand warm in his. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Collins said with satisfaction. Jack, you may kiss your bride. The moment stretched awkward and uncertain. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, and Jack realized they hadn't discussed this part. He leaned in carefully, pressing a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. More formality than affection. But even that simple touch sent a jolt through him, a reminder that this was real, that they'd just bound their lives together in the eyes of law and whatever higher power might be watching. Emma rushed forward as soon as they separated, throwing her arms around both of them. We're a family now, a real family. Sarah caught Jack's eye over her daughter's head, and he saw his own complicated emotions reflected there. Relief and uncertainty, determination and fear all tangled together. They signed the marriage certificate, Albert and Martha adding their signatures as witnesses. Reverend Collins filed the document with practiced efficiency, then shook Jack's hand. I'll be praying for you both, he said, and something in his tone suggested he knew this wasn't a conventional marriage. Marriage is work, even in the best circumstances. But I've seen you with them, Jack. You'll do right by these ladies. That's the plan. Martha hugged Sarah and whispered something Jack couldn't hear. Sarah nodded, blinking back tears, and squeezed the older woman's hands. They were walking back to the wagon when a familiar horse appeared at the end of the street. Chester Whitmore dismounted in front of the land office, his suit somehow still immaculate despite the heat. When he saw them, his expression shifted from neutral to coldly calculating. Mrs. Wright, he called, then corrected himself with obvious displeasure. Or should I say, Mrs. Mercer now. How convenient. Jack stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah. Whitmore. A marriage of convenience won't change anything, you know. Whitmore's smile was sharp. The Caldwells will simply argue that this proves Mrs. Mercer's desperation, that she'd marry a stranger rather than allow her daughter proper care. I'm not a stranger, Jack said evenly. I'm her husband, and Emma's legal guardian now. We'll see what the judge says about that. Whitmore pulled a paper from his satchel. The hearing has been scheduled for 2 weeks from today. I trust you'll both be in attendance? Sarah's hand found Jack's, her fingers gripping tight. We'll be there? Excellent. I do so look forward to it. Whitmore tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Oh, and congratulations on your nuptials. I'm sure it will be a very practical arrangement. He walked away, leaving the insinuation hanging in the air like bad smoke. Emma tugged on Sarah's dress, confused by the tension, and Sarah forced a smile for her daughter. Come on, sweetness, let's go home. Home. The word settled over Jack as they climbed into the wagon. The ranch had been his home for years, but it had never felt like more than a place to sleep and work. Now, with Sarah beside him and Emma chattering in the back about what they should have for supper, it was starting to mean something more. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town. Jack needed supplies, and Sarah wanted to pick up a few things now that she had access to the small savings Jack kept with the store's owner. While Sarah and Emma browsed the dry goods, Jack found himself cornered by Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife, and the town's most efficient source of gossip. Married, she said, eyes bright with curiosity. My. And here we all thought you were content to be a bachelor forever. Things change. They certainly do. Mrs. Henderson leaned in conspiratorially. There's talk, about how quick it all happened, about that lawyer from Cheyenne asking questions. Let people talk. Oh, I don't judge. She patted his arm. I think it's romantic, actually. A widow and her child finding shelter with a good man, like something from a story. Jack didn't bother correcting her romanticized version. If the town wanted to spin this as a love story rather than a legal strategy, so be it. The kindness in their interpretation might serve them better than the truth. Sarah appeared with her purchases, practical things like flour and sugar, but also a length of ribbon that Emma had begged for. Jack paid without comment, and they loaded everything into the wagon. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the morning journey. Emma fell asleep against Sarah's side, worn out by excitement and the heat. Sarah stared at the horizon, her expression unreadable. You all right? Jack asked quietly. I keep waiting to feel different, Sarah said. We got married today. We said vows, but I just feel the same. Did you expect lightning and thunder? Maybe. Something. She glanced at him. Does that sound foolish? No, it sounds honest. Jack guided the horses around a rough patch of road. My first marriage, I felt like I was floating for weeks. Couldn't think straight, couldn't eat. Everything was this bright, shining thing. He paused. This is different, but different doesn't mean wrong. What if we can't make it work? Then we'll fail together instead of separately. That's got to count for something. Sarah almost smiled. You're not very good at romantic reassurance. Never claimed to be. They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable now. When they reached the ranch, Jack unhitched the horses while Sarah carried Emma inside. By the time he finished his evening chores, full dark had fallen and lamplight glowed warm in the windows. He found Sarah in the kitchen, mixing batter for cornbread. Emma was setting the table, still sleepy but determined to help. The domestic scene should have felt strange, but instead it settled over Jack like an old, familiar coat. Supper will be ready soon, Sarah said without looking up. I hope you don't mind beans and cornbread. It's simple, but it's fine. Jack poured himself coffee and sat at the table. You don't have to apologize for the food, Sarah, or anything else. She nodded, still focused on the mixing bowl. Emma climbed into the chair beside Jack and leaned against his arm. Papa Jack, she said tentatively. Jack's breath caught. Sarah's hand stilled on the spoon. You can call me Jack, he said gently. Papa if you want to, but only if it feels right. Emma considered this seriously. Mama says you're going to keep us safe, that the bad people can't take me away now. That's right. Because you're strong? Because we're a family now, and families protect each other. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. She went back to setting the table, humming again, while Sarah and Jack exchanged a look across the kitchen, a moment of shared understanding about the weight of promises made to children. Dinner was simple but filling. They ate mostly in silence, the clatter of forks on tin plates, and Emma's occasional questions the only sounds. Afterward, Sarah insisted on washing up while Jack took Emma outside to check on the new kittens in the barn. The night air was cooler, finally releasing the day's stored heat. Stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the deepening blue like salt spilled on dark fabric. Emma ran ahead to the barn, her earlier exhaustion forgotten in her excitement to see the kittens. Jack followed more slowly, his mind turning over the events of the day. Married. He was married again to a woman he barely knew, with a ready-made family and a legal battle looming. By any reasonable measure, he'd lost his mind. But watching Emma cradle a tiny gray kitten, her face alight with pure joy, Jack couldn't quite bring himself to regret it. Sarah appeared in the barn doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. It's getting late, Emma. Time to come in. 5 more minutes? You said that 10 minutes ago, but Sarah's voice was gentle. Come on, sweetheart. The kittens need to sleep too. Emma reluctantly returned the kitten to its mother and trudged toward the house, dragging her feet. Sarah watched her go, then turned to Jack. Thank you, she said, for today, for all of this. You already thanked me. I know, but I need to say it again. She stepped closer. I know this isn't what you wanted for your life. Taking on someone else's problems, fighting someone else's battles. They're my battles now too, Jack interrupted. That's what the vows meant. Sarah's eyes shimmered in the lamplight from the barn. I'll try to be a good wife to you. I know I can't be what Anne was, but I'll try to... Don't. Jack's voice came out rougher than he intended. Don't try to be someone else. Just be you. That's enough. Is it? He wanted to say yes, wanted to offer the easy comfort she was seeking. But honesty had been the foundation of their agreement, so he gave her that instead. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Sarah nodded, accepting this. I should get Emma to bed. She's about to fall asleep standing up. She started to leave, then paused. Jack? Where will you sleep tonight? The question brought the practical realities of their situation into sharp focus. The house had one bedroom, one bed. There was the loft where Emma slept, and the barn where Jack had been spending his nights since they arrived. But they were married now, and people in town would expect... The barn's fine, Jack said, making the decision easy. Until we figure things out. Relief and something that might have been disappointment flickered across Sarah's face. Are you sure? I'm sure. Go on. Get Emma settled. He watched her walk back to the house, her silhouette framed briefly in the lamplight before the door closed. Then he was alone in the barn with the horses and the soft mewing of kittens and the enormity of what he'd done. Jack spread his bedroll in the empty stall he'd been using, the straw beneath providing minimal cushioning. Through the gaps in the barn walls, he could see the house, could imagine Sarah moving through the rooms, tucking Emma in, preparing for bed herself. His wife. The word still felt strange, like clothes that didn't quite fit. Sleep was a long time coming. When it finally arrived, Jack dreamed of Anne and Lily, their faces fading like mist in morning sun, replaced by new faces that were becoming familiar. He woke before dawn with an ache in his chest that might have been grief or hope or some combination of both. The next week passed in a strange new rhythm. Days were filled with ranch work and preparations for the hearing. Jack taught Emma to read while Sarah practiced her testimony with determination that bordered on grim. Evenings they spent together, slowly learning the shape of this new family they were building. Sarah proved to be capable and resourceful, taking over the household management with quiet efficiency. She learned how Jack liked his coffee, how he preferred his eggs, when to push conversation, and when to leave him to his thoughts. In return, Jack fixed the broken rocking chair she favored, reinforced the loft ladder so she wouldn't worry about Emma falling, and brought her wild sage that she dried and hung in bunches around the house. They were careful with each other, polite almost to a fault. They didn't touch beyond what was necessary. They didn't talk about anything deeper than the weather or Emma's lessons or what needed doing around the ranch. It was safe, comfortable even. It was also lonely in ways Jack hadn't anticipated. 6 days after the wedding, a second letter arrived from Whitmore. This one was colder, more threatening. The Caldwells had hired additional counsel, were prepared to argue that the marriage was a sham entered into solely to circumvent their custody claim. They would be calling witnesses to testify to Jack's character, or lack thereof. Sarah read the letter twice, her hands shaking. They're going to destroy us. They're going to try. Jack took the letter from her and tossed it onto the fire. Let them. We've got the truth on our side. The truth doesn't always win. Then we'll make it win. Emma was in town with Reverend Collins's wife, learning to sew, which meant they were alone. Sarah paced the small house like a caged animal, her anxiety a living thing filling the space. I can't lose her, Jack. I can't. Her voice broke. She's all I have left of Thomas. All I have left of the life we were trying to build. If they take her, they won't. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll fight like hell to prevent it. Jack caught her arm gently, stopping her frantic movement. Sarah, look at me. She did, her eyes wide and frightened. We're going to win this, Jack said with more certainty than he felt. But even if something goes wrong, even if the worst happens, we don't give up. We find another way. We keep fighting until there's no fight left. Why are you doing this? The question came out desperate. Why do you care so much? Because somewhere in the past few weeks, you and Emma stopped being strangers and started being mine, Jack thought. Because I wake up every morning and the first thing I think about is making sure you're both safe. Because for the first time in 8 years, I have something worth protecting. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, because it's the right thing to do. Sarah searched his face, looking for something he wasn't sure he could give her. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Jack froze, every muscle locking up. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him, couldn't remember the last time he'd allowed anyone this close. Slowly, carefully, he brought his arms up to return the embrace. Sarah was shaking, silent sobs racking her body. Jack held her while she cried, one hand moving in awkward circles on her back the way he used to comfort Lily when she had nightmares. It felt strange and right at the same time, this grief-stricken woman finding shelter in his arms. When the storm finally passed, Sarah pulled back, wiping at her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. I'm not usually so, she gestured helplessly, emotional. You're scared. You're allowed to be. Sarah managed a watery smile. You're a good man, Jack Mercer. I hope you know that. Before Jack could respond, they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Sarah quickly composed herself, smoothing her hair and dress. By the time Martha Collins arrived with Emma, there was no sign of the breakdown except for Sarah's slightly reddened eyes. That night, lying in the barn, Jack replayed the moment over and over. The weight of Sarah in his arms, the trust it took for her to show him that vulnerability, the realization that somewhere along the way his feelings had shifted from duty to something more complicated. He was in trouble, he realized. Deep, dangerous trouble. Because he'd married Sarah Wright to protect her and Emma from the Caldwells' legal machinations. He'd married her as a practical solution to a pressing problem. He'd married her with the understanding that affection might never grow, that they might spend the rest of their lives as cordial strangers sharing a name and a roof. But lying in the dark, Jack had to admit the truth, at least to himself. He was starting to care, really care, in ways that made him vulnerable, that opened up old wounds he'd thought scarred over, and the hearing was in 8 days. The courthouse in Cheyenne was an imposing brick structure that seemed designed to intimidate. Jack felt it the moment they walked through the heavy oak doors, the weight of law and power pressing down like a physical thing. Sarah's hand trembled in the crook of his arm, and Emma walked between them, clutching a cloth doll Martha Collins had made for her. They'd left the ranch before dawn, making the long journey in Jack's wagon. Sarah had barely slept the night before, and dark circles shadowed her eyes despite her careful grooming. She wore the same blue dress from their wedding, and Jack had put on his suit again, the tie sitting heavy around his neck like a noose. Porter met them in the hallway outside the courtroom. He was younger than Jack expected, perhaps 35, with sharp eyes and an air of barely contained energy. He shook Jack's hand firmly, then turned to Sarah with a reassuring smile. Mrs. Mercer, I've reviewed all the documents Chester Whitmore filed. Their case is built on implications and insinuations, not facts. He knelt to Emma's level. And you must be Miss Emma. I'm Mr. Porter, and I'm going to help make sure you can stay with your mama and Jack. Emma studied him with solemn eyes. Are you going to stop the bad people? I'm certainly going to try. Porter led them to a small side room where they could wait. Through the door, Jack could hear the courtroom filling, the scrape of chairs, low voices, the rustle of papers. His stomach churned with an anxiety he hadn't felt since the war, when waiting before battle meant dwelling on all the ways things could go wrong. The judge is Harold Morrison, Porter said, pulling out his notes. He's fair but traditional. He values stability, propriety, established order. The Caldwells will play to that. They'll present themselves as the stable option, the proper choice. And we counter with what? Sarah asked, her voice tight. The truth. That Emma has a loving mother who has cared for her through impossible circumstances. That she has a stepfather willing to provide for them both. That this family, unconventional as its formation might be, is built on genuine care rather than abstract notions of propriety. Porter looked at Jack. They're going to attack your marriage, question its legitimacy, your motives, everything. You need to be prepared for that. I am. Are you? Porter's gaze was steady. Because Whitmore is good at what he does. He'll try to make you angry, make you say something you'll regret. He'll paint you as either a opportunist taking advantage of a vulnerable woman or a fool being manipulated. Can you keep your composure through that? Jack thought about the war, about watching friends die, about burying his wife and daughter in the same week. I can handle whatever he throws at me. A bailiff appeared in the doorway. Judge Morrison is ready. The courtroom was smaller than Jack expected, but packed with people. He recognized a few faces from Bitter Creek, Albert from the telegraph office, Mrs. Henderson from the general store, even Reverend Collins sitting in the back row. On the other side of the room sat a woman who could only be Victoria Caldwell. She was in her 60s, dressed in expensive black silk that probably cost more than Jack made in a year. Her silver hair was swept up in an elaborate style, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. But it was her face that struck Jack, aristocratic, coldly beautiful, and utterly without warmth as she stared at her daughter. Sarah had gone rigid at Jack's side. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment he thought she might bolt. He covered her hand with his, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Morrison. The judge was a stern-looking man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. He settled into his seat and surveyed the room with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many family disputes turn ugly. Be seated. We're here today to consider a petition for custody of the minor child Emma Wright, filed by Mr. and Mrs. Edward Caldwell of Boston, Massachusetts. Judge Morrison's voice was dry and precise. Mr. Whitmore, you may present your opening statement. Whitmore stood, somehow looking even more polished than usual in his tailored suit. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case about what's best for the child. Emma Wright is the granddaughter of Edward and Victoria Caldwell, upstanding citizens with the means and desire to provide her with every advantage in life. Her mother, while no doubt well-intentioned, is a penniless widow who has demonstrated questionable judgment in her recent decisions. He paused, letting the implication sink in. The Caldwells seek custody not out of malice, but out of genuine concern for their granddaughter's welfare. Porter rose. Your Honor, the respondent is no longer a penniless widow, but Mrs. Sarah Mercer, wife of Jack Mercer, a respected rancher and landowner. She has a stable home, a loving family, and most importantly, she is Emma's mother, the woman who has cared for her daughter every day of her life. The Caldwells' sudden interest in their granddaughter comes only after they've been estranged from Mrs. Mercer for years, and it's worth examining their true motives. Judge Morrison made a note. Very well. Mr. Whitmore, call your first witness. The petitioners call Mrs. Victoria Caldwell. Sarah's mother rose and walked to the witness stand with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, her voice cultured and confident. Whitmore approached her with deference. Mrs. Caldwell, can you describe your relationship with your daughter, Sarah? I gave birth to her, raised her, provided her with every opportunity. Victoria's voice was cool. Unfortunately, Sarah chose to reject those opportunities in favor of a man I considered unsuitable. Thomas Wright? Yes. A man with no prospects, no family connections, no means of supporting my daughter in the manner to which she was accustomed. I advised against the marriage strongly. And what happened when she married him anyway? Victoria's lips thinned. I told Sarah that if she chose that path, she would have to live with the consequences, that I could not in good conscience support a union I knew would end in hardship and regret. Did you have contact with her after the marriage? No. Sarah made her choice, and I made mine. Whitmore nodded sympathetically. And when did you learn about Thomas Wright's death? Only recently, when a private investigator I'd hired to locate Sarah finally succeeded. I was horrified to learn that my daughter and granddaughter had been attacked, that Thomas was dead, and that they were living in frontier conditions with a stranger. What was your response? Immediate concern for Emma's welfare. Whatever disagreement Sarah and I might have, the child is innocent. She deserves stability, education, a future. Not a rough ranch in the wilderness with people she barely knows. Jack felt Sarah trembling beside him. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles showed white. Whitmore continued. In your assessment, Mrs. Caldwell, is your daughter capable of providing appropriate care for Emma? Sarah was always headstrong and impulsive. I had hoped maturity would temper those qualities, but her recent actions suggest otherwise. Marrying a stranger within weeks of her husband's death, involving her daughter in this hasty arrangement, it shows the same poor judgment that led her to marry Thomas Wright. Victoria's gaze swept the courtroom. I love my daughter, but love doesn't blind me to her failings. Emma deserves better. Porter stood for cross-examination, and his demeanor had shifted from friendly to razor-sharp. Mrs. Caldwell, you say you love your daughter. Is that why you cut her off completely when she married against your wishes? I had to make a difficult choice. A choice that left a 20-year-old woman alone with no family support? She had a husband. That was her choice. And when that husband died, when your daughter was attacked and wounded, you didn't rush to her aid. You hired a private investigator. Why? Victoria's composure flickered. I wanted to assess the situation before taking action. Or perhaps you wanted to locate Emma specifically, because there's something you haven't mentioned to this court, isn't there? Porter pulled out a document. Your husband's will filed with probate in Boston 3 months ago. In it, he leaves a substantial trust fund, some $200,000, to his only grandchild, Emma Wright. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Order, Porter pressed on. That inheritance is the real reason for this custody petition, isn't it? You want control of Emma because you want control of that money. That's absurd, Victoria snapped, her cultured veneer cracking. The money is for Emma's benefit. A benefit she can't access unless she's in your custody, under your control. Porter turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this will as evidence. You'll note that the trust specifies Emma's legal guardian has full authority over the funds until she reaches 21. Whitmore shot to his feet. Objection. The trust fund is irrelevant to the question of the child's welfare. On the contrary, Porter countered, it's entirely relevant to the petitioner's motivation. They showed no interest in Emma until money entered the picture. Judge Morrison studied the document Porter handed him. Objection overruled. The will is entered into evidence. Mrs. Caldwell, you may step down. Victoria returned to her seat, her face rigid with barely controlled anger. Sarah was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jack wanted to comfort her, but forced himself to remain still, aware that every gesture was being watched and judged. Whitmore called his next witness, a society matron from Boston who testified to Victoria Caldwell's impeccable character and standing in the community. Porter's cross-examination was brief, establishing that the woman had never met Sarah or Emma and knew nothing about their actual circumstances. Then Whitmore called a doctor who testified about the challenges of frontier medical care, the risk to a child's health in such conditions. Porter countered by getting the doctor to admit he'd never been west of Pennsylvania and was speculating based on assumptions rather than facts. The morning dragged on, each witness adding layers to the Caldwell's case. By the time Judge Morrison called for a lunch recess, Jack's jaw ached from clenching it. They ate in silence at a small restaurant near the courthouse. Emma picked at her food, sensing the tension. Sarah barely touched her plate. Porter's good, Jack said quietly. He's dismantling their case piece by piece. It doesn't matter, Sarah's voice was hollow. You saw my mother in there. She's convinced she's right, that she's saving Emma from me. And the judge, he kept looking at me like I was some kind of criminal. He's listening to both sides. That's his job. Jack, Sarah set down her fork. I've been thinking, maybe if I just agreed to let them see Emma sometimes, to have some role in her life, they might drop this. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. She pressed her hands to her face. I'm so tired of fighting. Jack reached across the table and gently pulled her hands away. Look at me. Sarah, look at me. She did, her eyes red and exhausted. We're not giving up. Not now, not ever. You hear me? But if we lose, we're not going to lose. Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mama, why are you sad? Sarah gathered her daughter close, kissing the top of her head. I'm not sad, baby, just tired, but everything's going to be all right. Jack hoped he was right. Hoped Porter's skill in the truth would be enough. Because if it wasn't, he had no idea what they'd do next. The afternoon session began with Porter calling his witnesses. First was Reverend Collins, who testified to Sarah's character and her devotion to Emma. Whitmore tried to shake him on cross-examination, but the Reverend held firm. "I've been a minister for 40 years, Collins said. I know a loving mother when I see one. Sarah Mercer is that and more." Martha Collins followed, describing how she'd watched Sarah care for Emma, how the child was well-fed, well-mannered, and clearly loved. Then Albert from the telegraph office, who testified that Jack was an honest man, well-respected in the community. Each witness chipped away at the Caldwells' narrative, but Jack could see it wasn't enough. The judge's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. Finally, Porter called Sarah to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, refusing to look at her mother. Her hand shook as she placed it on the Bible, but her voice was steady when she took the oath. Porter started gently. "Mrs. Mercer, can you tell the court about your relationship with Emma?" "She's my daughter, my entire world." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "From the moment she was born, I've done everything I could to give her a good life, to keep her safe and happy and loved. And after your husband's death, when you were wounded and alone, what did you do?" "I survived. For Emma. Because she needed me." Sarah's voice strengthened. "I kept her alive for 3 days in the heat, kept her fed and hydrated and protected until Jack found us. I would have died before I let anything happen to her." "Why did you marry Jack Mercer?" Sarah hesitated and Jack held his breath. This was the moment everything could fall apart. "At first," Sarah said slowly, "it was practical. I needed protection from my mother's lawyers, needed a way to prove I could provide a stable home for Emma. But Jack—" She looked across the courtroom and found his eyes. "Jack showed up when we had nothing. He saved our lives, asked nothing in return. He taught Emma to read, fixed things around the house without being asked, made us feel safe for the first time since the attack. So yes, I married him for practical reasons. But I also married him because he's a good man who cares about Emma and me, and that seemed like enough of a foundation to build on." Whitmore rose for cross-examination, and his friendly demeanor was gone. "Mrs. Mercer, you describe yourself as a devoted mother, yet you dragged your daughter into the wilderness against your own mother's advice, married a man your family disapproved of, and ended up watching your husband die violently. Is that your definition of good judgment?" Sarah flinched. "Thomas wanted a better life for us. We were chasing that dream. A dream that got him killed and you wounded. And now you've married another man you barely know. A man you admit you married primarily for practical, legal reasons. What happens when those practical reasons no longer exist? Will you discard this marriage as readily as you entered it?" "No." Sarah's voice rang clear. "I made vows. I intend to keep them." "Even though you don't love him?" The question hung in the air. Sarah's eyes found Jack's again, and in that moment something passed between them. An understanding, a promise, something too complex to name. "I didn't say I don't love him," Sarah said quietly. "I said the marriage started as a practical arrangement. That doesn't mean it will stay that way." Whitmore's smile was cruel. "How convenient. You discover love just in time for this hearing." "Objection," Porter said sharply. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained. Mr. Whitmore, move on." But the damage was done. Whitmore continued his assault, questioning Sarah's decisions, her character, her ability to provide for Emma without family support. By the time he finished, Sarah looked shattered. Porter called one final witness. "The respondent calls Jack Mercer." Jack walked to the stand on legs that felt unsteady. He'd faced down armed men, survived battles, endured losses that should have broken him. But standing in front of that courtroom, knowing everything depended on what he said next, was somehow more terrifying than any of it. Porter's questions were straightforward. Jack described finding Sarah and Emma, treating Sarah's wounds the weeks that followed. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, just stating the facts as they'd happened. "Why did you agree to marry Sarah?" Porter asked. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because Emma deserved to stay with her mother, and I had the means to help make that happen." "And now? Do you regret it?" Jack thought about Sarah crying in his arms, about Emma calling him Papa Jack, about the way the house felt warmer with them in it. "No, I don't regret it." "If the court grants custody to the Caldwells, what will you do?" "Whatever it takes to get Emma back. Legal appeals, whatever Porter recommends. I won't stop fighting. Whitmore approached for cross-examination with the confidence of a predator. Mr. Mercer, you're a rancher. How much money did you make last year? About $600 after expenses. $600, and the Caldwells are offering Emma a trust fund worth $200,000. Can you honestly say you can provide for her as well as they can? Money isn't everything. Easy to say when you don't have it. Whitmore circled like a shark. Tell me, Mr. Mercer, before Sarah and Emma came along, how long had you been alone on that ranch? 8 years. 8 years of isolation, no wife, no family. Then suddenly a beautiful woman appears, vulnerable and grateful, and you marry her within weeks. Isn't it true that you took advantage of her desperate situation? No. No? You expect this court to believe that a man alone for 8 years offered the companionship of an attractive widow, acted purely out of altruism. Jack's temper flared, but he forced it down. I expect this court to believe I saw people in need and helped them. That's what decent people do. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity. A woman with a substantial inheritance through her daughter, a woman who would be very grateful for your assistance. That's a lie, Jack said flatly. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've positioned yourself quite nicely. Legal father to an heiress, married to a woman who had nowhere else to turn. Whitmore leaned in. How long do you think this marriage will last once the custody issue is resolved? Once Sarah no longer needs your protection? Jack met Whitmore's eyes and held them. However long it takes to prove you wrong. A few people in the gallery laughed softly. Whitmore's jaw tightened, but he pressed on for another 20 minutes, trying to shake Jack's story, to find contradictions or admissions he could exploit. Jack held firm, answering each question with the same steady honesty that had carried him through everything else. Finally, Judge Morrison called a halt. I've heard enough testimony. Both sides will submit closing arguments, and I'll render my decision. Porter stood. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Emma Wright is loved, cared for, and safe with her mother and stepfather. The Caldwells' petition is motivated by greed, not concern. They seek control of the child's inheritance, nothing more. I urge you to deny their petition and allow this family to remain intact. Whitmore's closing was polished and persuasive. He painted the Caldwells as concerned grandparents, Sarah as a woman of poor judgment, and Jack as an opportunist. He asked the court to consider Emma's future, the advantages the Caldwells could provide, the stability of their established household. When both lawyers finished, Judge Morrison removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. The courtroom was utterly silent. This is a difficult case, the judge said finally. On one hand, we have grandparents with substantial means and a desire to provide for their grandchild. On the other, we have a mother who clearly loves her daughter and has fought to protect her through unimaginable circumstances. He paused. But there's one factor that troubles me greatly, the trust fund. Victoria Caldwell's face went rigid. Mr. Whitmore has argued that the money is irrelevant, that the Caldwells would seek custody regardless. But I find that difficult to believe, given their complete lack of contact with Emma until after Mr. Caldwell's death. Judge Morrison put his spectacles back on. The law exists to protect children, not to enrich their guardians, and I cannot in good conscience award custody to people whose motivation appears to be primarily financial. Hope flared in Jack's chest. However, the judge continued, I also have concerns about the marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Mercer. It happened very quickly, under circumstances that raise questions about its authenticity. The Hope guttered. Therefore, I'm going to take an unusual step. Judge Morrison looked directly at Jack and Sarah. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, I'm going to ask you to do something that will resolve my doubts and settle this matter conclusively. Jack's heart hammered. What's that, Your Honor? I want you to formally renounce Emma's inheritance. The courtroom erupted. Victoria Caldwell shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. Whitmore was shouting objections. Sarah sat frozen, her face pale. Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order! When the noise died down, the judge continued. If Mr. and Mrs. Mercer are willing to legally disclaim Emma's right to the trust fund, to sign documents ensuring the money reverts to the Caldwell estate, Then the primary motivation for this custody battle disappears. The Caldwells will have no financial incentive to pursue custody, and I can rule based purely on what's best for the child. Your Honor, you can't ask them to give up $200,000, Whitmore protested. I'm not asking them to give up anything. I'm offering them a choice. The judge's gaze was steady. If they truly married for love, if they truly want what's best for Emma rather than what's best for their bank account, they'll agree. If not, well, that tells me everything I need to know about their motivations. Porter leaned in to whisper urgently to Jack and Sarah. You don't have to do this. We can fight it. Appeal. No. Sarah's voice was clear and strong. We'll do it. Sarah, that's Emma's inheritance. Her future. Her future is with me and Jack, not in some trust fund. Sarah stood. Your Honor, we agree to your terms. Whatever paperwork is needed, we'll sign it. Jack rose beside her. Both of us. Judge Morrison allowed himself a small smile. Very well. My clerk will prepare the necessary documents. Once they're signed and filed, I'll issue my ruling. He banged his gavel. This court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. People flooded out of the courtroom, talking excitedly. Victoria Caldwell swept past them without a word, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Whitmore followed, already speaking urgently into her ear. Sarah sagged against Jack, and he caught her, holding her upright. Emma rushed over, wrapping her arms around both of them. Is it over? The girl asked. Can we go home? Not yet, sweetheart, Sarah said, but soon, very soon. Porter gathered his papers, shaking his head. I can't believe you just gave away $200,000. We didn't give away anything, Jack said. We just chose what matters. That night, they stayed in a modest hotel near the courthouse. Emma fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the day's stress. Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the darkened street. Jack joined her, standing close but not touching. You all right? I just gave away my daughter's future. No, you secured it. Sarah turned to look at him. What if Morrison rules against us anyway? What if giving up the money wasn't enough? Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together. Together, Sarah repeated softly. She reached out and took his hand. Jack, what I said in there about the marriage, about love, you don't have to explain. I want to. She squeezed his fingers. I meant it. This started as something practical, but somewhere along the way, it became real. You became real. Not as a means to an end, but as, she struggled for words, as someone I can't imagine my life without. Jack's throat tightened. Sarah, I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I know you married me out of duty, out of kindness. But I need you to know that for me, it's more than that now. I care about you, Jack, deeply. He looked at their joined hands, this woman who'd walked into his life in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it better just by being in it. I care about you too, both of you, more than I thought I could care about anything after Anne and Lily. Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. Really? Really? Jack pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know I want to face it with you. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet darkness. Two broken people finding wholeness in their shared determination to protect what they'd built. Tomorrow, Judge Morrison would rule. Tomorrow, they'd find out if their gamble had paid off, if giving away a fortune would be enough to keep their family intact. But tonight, standing in a rented room in Cheyenne, with Sarah in his arms and Emma sleeping peacefully nearby, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in 8 long years. Hope. Morning came too slowly and too quickly at the same time. Jack had barely slept, listening to the sounds of the unfamiliar hotel, his mind cycling through every possible outcome. Beside him in the narrow bed they'd reluctantly shared, Sarah had tossed restlessly until just before dawn, when exhaustion finally claimed her. He slipped out carefully, not wanting to wake her, and found Emma already up, sitting by the window with her doll. The early light caught in her blonde hair, making her look impossibly small and fragile. Morning, Papa Jack, she whispered. The name still caught him off guard, still made something warm and frightening bloom in his chest. Morning, Emma. You sleep all right? I had dreams about the bad lady, the one who looks like Mama but isn't nice. Jack sat beside her, trying to find words that wouldn't scare her more. Your grandmother isn't bad exactly. She's just confused about what's important. Mama says she wanted to take me away. She did, but that's not going to happen. Emma studied his face with those two old eyes. How do you know? Because I'll burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you, Jack thought. But he said, because your mama and I won't let it. You're ours, Emma. That's not changing. The girl seemed satisfied with this answer. She climbed into his lap, something she'd started doing more often, and Jack held her while the sun rose over Cheyenne and turned the dusty streets to gold. Sarah woke an hour later, and they dressed in tense silence. The documents they'd signed the previous evening sat on the dresser, legal papers renouncing Emma's claim to the Caldwell Trust, witnessed and notarized. $200,000, gone with the stroke of a pen. No regrets? Jack asked as Sarah pinned up her hair. She met his eyes in the mirror. Only that it came to this. But the money? She shook her head. I'd give up 10 times that amount to keep her safe. They ate a quick breakfast at the hotel dining room, though none of them had much appetite. Emma pushed eggs around her plate while Sarah drank coffee that had long since gone cold. Jack forced down toast that tasted like sawdust and tried to project a calm he didn't feel. The walk to the courthouse felt like a funeral procession. People were already gathering, drawn by yesterday's drama. Jack recognized several reporters from the Cheyenne newspaper, their pencils poised to capture whatever happened next. Victoria Caldwell arrived in a black carriage, her face a mask of cold fury as she swept past them without acknowledgement. Inside, Judge Morrison's courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The air was thick with summer heat and anticipation. Porter met them at their table, his expression carefully neutral. The documents have been filed. Morrison has them. Now we wait. How long? Sarah asked. However long it takes him to make up his mind. They didn't have to wait long. Judge Morrison entered at precisely 9 o'clock, his robes crisp despite the heat. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the same weary expression he'd worn yesterday. I've reviewed the documents filed by Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, he began without preamble. They have legally and irrevocably renounced any claim Emma Wright might have to the Caldwell Trust Fund. The money will revert to the estate as specified in Edward Caldwell's will. Victoria Caldwell sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. Whitmore whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. This action clarifies the situation considerably, Judge Morrison continued. It demonstrates that Mr. and Mrs. Mercer's interest in Emma is genuine and not financially motivated. It also removes the primary basis for the Caldwell's custody petition. Hope flickered in Jack's chest, fragile as candlelight. However, I still have concerns about the hasty nature of the Mercers' marriage and the overall stability of their household. The judge paused, and Jack's hope guttered. Therefore, I'm going to make my ruling conditional. Your Honor, Porter started to rise, but Morrison waved him down. Custody of Emma Wright will remain with her mother, Sarah Mercer. However, the court will appoint a monitor to check on the child's welfare every 3 months for the next year. If at any time the monitor finds Emma is being neglected or improperly cared for, the Caldwells may refile their petition. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Sarah's hand found Jack's under the table, squeezing so hard it hurt. Furthermore, Judge Morrison said, his voice taking on a harder edge, I want to address Mrs. Victoria Caldwell directly. Victoria's head came up sharply. Madam, you came to this court claiming concern for your granddaughter's welfare, but your actions suggest your concern was primarily financial. You abandoned your daughter when she needed you most, showed no interest in your granddaughter until money entered the picture, and were willing to traumatize a child who has already suffered tremendous loss in order to gain control of her inheritance. The judge's disgust was palpable. I find your behavior reprehensible. Should you attempt to contact Emma or the Mercers in any way beyond what is strictly necessary for legal matters, I will consider it harassment and act accordingly. Do I make myself clear? Victoria's face had gone white with rage. Perfectly clear, Your Honor. Good. This matter is concluded. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed toward them, shouting questions. Victoria Caldwell stood frozen for a moment, then turned and left without a word, Whitmore scrambling to follow. Jack pulled Sarah and Emma close, shielding them from the crush of bodies. Porter was grinning. "We won. Not perfectly, but we won." "Thank you," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much. Thank Jack, and thank yourselves for being willing to give up that money. That's what tipped the scales." Porter shook Jack's hand. "You're a good man, Mercer. Take care of them." "I will." They pushed through the crowd and out into the bright summer morning. The heat hit them like a wall, but Jack had never felt anything more welcome. They'd won. Emma was theirs. Victoria Caldwell could rage all she wanted, but she had no power over them anymore. Emma looked up at Sarah, confused by the tears. "Mama, why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy, sweetheart. So happy." "Can we go home now?" "Home." The word settled over Jack like a benediction. "Yes, let's go home." The journey back to the ranch took all day, but none of them minded. Emma chattered excitedly, her earlier fear forgotten. Sarah sat close to Jack on the wagon seat, their shoulders touching, and every so often she'd look at him with something that made his heart skip. They reached the ranch just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The house looked small and weathered against the vast Wyoming landscape, but it had never looked more beautiful to Jack. He helped Sarah and Emma down from the wagon, then stood for a moment, taking it in. This place that had been his refuge, his isolation, his penance for 8 years, it was something different now. It was full. It was alive. It was home. "Jack?" Sarah stood on the porch, Emma already inside checking on the kittens. "You coming?" "In a minute." She came back down the steps and joined him, looking at the house with him. "What are you thinking?" "That everything's different now." "Is that bad?" "No." Jack turned to face her. "It's the opposite of bad." Sarah smiled, and it was the first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her. "We need to talk. About what happens now. About what we are to each other." "I know what we are," Jack said. "We're married. We're partners. We're Emma's parents." "But are we?" Sarah hesitated. "Are we truly husband and wife, or are we still just two people sharing a house and a name?" Jack considered the question carefully. He thought about the past weeks, about Sarah crying in his arms and Emma calling him Papa Jack. He thought about the way his chest tightened when Sarah smiled, about how the house felt empty when she wasn't in it. He thought about standing in that courtroom, willing to give up everything to keep them safe. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be a husband again, how to let someone in after I spent so long keeping everyone out. But I know I want to try. With you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I want to try too. I'm scared, Jack. I'm terrified of being hurt again, of losing someone else I care about. But I'm more scared of not taking this chance." "Then we'll be scared together." She laughed through her tears. "That seems to be our way, doesn't it? Doing everything terrified and hopeful at the same time." Jack reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek. "Sarah, I'm not good with words. I'm not romantic or poetic or any of the things you probably deserve. But I can promise you this. I will show up every day. I will work to make this marriage real, to be the husband and father this family needs. I will choose you and Emma every single day for the rest of my life." "That's all I need," Sarah whispered. "Just you showing up, just you trying." She stepped closer, and this time when they kissed, it wasn't the brief formal touch from their wedding. This was real, tentative and sweet and full of promise. Jack's hands came up to frame her face, and Sarah's fingers curled into his shirt, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them and this fragile, beautiful thing they were building. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Emma's voice came from the doorway. "Does this mean you love each other now?" Sarah laughed and turned to her daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, I think it does." "Good," Emma grinned, "because I was getting tired of you two being so careful around each other. It was weird." Jack couldn't help but smile. "Out of the mouths of babes." "Come on," Sarah said, taking his hand. "Let's go inside. I'll make supper, and we can figure out what comes next." What came next was simpler than Jack expected and more complicated at the same time. The monitor appointed by the court came 3 months later. A stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, who inspected the house, interviewed Emma and asked probing questions about their marriage. She left satisfied, filing a glowing report that spoke of a happy, well-adjusted child in a loving home. The second visit was more perfunctory. The third was almost friendly. After the fourth and final visit, Mrs. Patterson told them the court saw no reason to continue monitoring. The Mercers were officially free from oversight. Meanwhile, life settled into new rhythms. Sarah took over the household management completely, turning the rough bachelor dwelling into something that actually felt like a home. Curtains appeared in the windows, quilts on the bed, herbs drying in the kitchen. She planted a garden that flourished under her care, and soon they had fresh vegetables to supplement their diet. Emma thrived. She grew taller, healthier, more confident. Jack taught her to ride, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman. Sarah taught her sewing and cooking and all the domestic skills a frontier girl needed. Together, they educated her, Jack with books and Sarah with practical wisdom, and watched as she blossomed from a traumatized child into a bright, curious girl with opinions and dreams. The marriage itself unfolded slowly, carefully. Sarah moved from the loft to Jack's room, and they learned each other in gradual increments. They learned how to share space, how to navigate disagreements, how to support each other through the hard days that still came. Some nights, Sarah woke screaming from nightmares about the attack, and Jack held her until the terror passed. Some nights, Jack lay awake, haunted by memories of Anne and Lily, and Sarah simply rested her hand on his chest, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. Intimacy came when they were ready, not rushed or forced, but natural as breathing. And if it wasn't the passionate romance of Jack's first marriage, it was something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection that grew stronger with each passing day. 2 years after the hearing, on a warm summer evening, much like the one when Jack had first found them, Sarah stood on the porch, watching Emma play with a new litter of kittens. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, and there was a peaceful contentment on her face that made Jack's breath catch. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on her shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Fat, tired, happy." Sarah leaned back against him. "The baby's been kicking all afternoon." Jack placed his hand over hers, feeling the flutter of movement beneath. Their child, his and Sarah's, a symbol of everything they'd built together from the ashes of their separate tragedies. "Have you thought any more about names?" Sarah asked. "If it's a girl, I still like Anne Marie, after my first wife and your middle name." Sarah turned in his arms. "And if it's a boy?" "Thomas Jack, after your first husband and, well," Sarah's eyes glistened. "You'd do that? Honor Thomas that way?" "He was Emma's father. He deserves to be remembered." Jack cupped her face gently. "We don't have to forget the people we lost to build something new, Sarah. They're part of our story, part of what made us who we are." She kissed him, soft and lingering. "I love you, Jack Mercer. Have I told you that today?" "Only twice, but I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you." She smiled. "There. 3 times. I love you too." The words still felt new in his mouth, still carried weight, but they were true, completely and utterly true. Emma came running up, a kitten in her arms. "Papa, can I keep this one, please? I'll take care of it, I promise." Jack pretended to consider seriously. "Well, I suppose one more cat won't hurt, but you're responsible for feeding it and cleaning up after it." "I will! Thank you, Papa!" Emma hugged him fiercely, careful of the kitten, then rushed off to show Sarah her prize. Standing there on the porch of his ranch, with his wife and daughter laughing together and a new child on the way, Jack felt something he'd thought lost forever after Anne and Lily died. He felt complete, whole. Like all the broken pieces had finally settled into a new pattern that made sense. A rider appeared on the horizon, and Jack tensed instinctively. Old habits died hard. But it was just Albert from town bringing the mail and news. He dismounted and handed Jack a letter. "Came from Boston," Albert said. "Figured it was important." Jack's jaw tightened as he recognized the Caldwell family seal. Sarah saw his expression and came to stand beside him. "It's from my mother," she said quietly. "You want me to burn it?" "No, let's see what she has to say." Jack opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of expensive stationery. The handwriting was elegant and precise, every letter perfect. "Sarah," he read aloud, "I write not to apologize, for I still believe I was right to be concerned for Emma's welfare. However, time has given me perspective. The reports from the court monitor speak of a happy, healthy child in a stable home. Whatever my feelings about your choices, I cannot deny that you have provided Emma with what she needs. I will not trouble you further. I ask only that when Emma is older, you allow her to make her own decision about whether she wishes to know her grandmother. I remain, as always, your mother, Victoria Caldwell." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She couldn't even bring herself to say she was wrong. "No, but it's as close to an apology as someone like her can manage." Jack folded the letter. "What do you want to do with it?" "Keep it for Emma. One day, when she's old enough to understand, she can decide if she wants to reach out." Sarah took the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. "But that's her choice. Not mine. Not my mother's. Hers." It was, Jack thought, a perfect encapsulation of who Sarah was. Strong enough to set boundaries, generous enough to leave doors open for her daughter's future. He'd chosen well that day he'd offered marriage, or perhaps they'd chosen each other, two broken people finding strength in their brokenness. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, the ranch prospered. Jack expanded his herd, built a new barn, even hired a hand to help with the heavier work now that Sarah was in the final months of her pregnancy. The community embraced them fully, no longer the subject of gossip, but simply another family working to build a life in the harsh Wyoming territory. On a cold January night with snow falling thick outside and the wind howling around the eaves, Sarah gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jack felt the old terror rising, the fear of loss, of being left alone again. But Sarah was strong, stronger than anyone he'd ever known. And when dawn broke, she placed a red-faced, squalling baby in his arms. "Thomas Jack Mercer," she whispered, exhausted but triumphant. "Tommy." Jack looked down at his son, this tiny scrap of life that was half Sarah and half himself, and felt tears streaming down his face. Emma crowded close, wanting to see her baby brother, and Sarah watched them both with a smile that could have lit the whole dark world. "We did it," Jack said hoarsely. "We really did it." "Did you ever doubt?" "Every single day." He carefully passed Tommy back to Sarah. "But I kept showing up anyway. That's all I ever asked." The years that followed were good ones. Not easy. Frontier life was never easy, but good. Tommy grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's stubborn determination. Emma became a young woman who was fierce and kind in equal measure, who wanted to be a teacher and help other children learn. Sarah's strength became legend in the community, and she became the person people turned to in times of trouble, offering advice and practical help with the same steady competence she brought to everything. Jack himself changed in ways he couldn't have predicted. The isolation that had seemed necessary after Anne and Lily died revealed itself as a kind of death, a slow withering of everything that made life worth living. Sarah and Emma had dragged him back into the world of the living, kicking and screaming at first, but eventually with gratitude. He learned to laugh again, to hope, to love without the constant terror of loss, because Sarah taught him that love was worth the risk, always worth the risk. On the 5th anniversary of the day he'd found them on the plains, Jack woke early and slipped out of bed. Sarah stirred but didn't wake, and Tommy was still asleep in his cradle. Emma had her own room now, in the addition Jack had built the previous summer. He walked out onto the porch and watched the sun rise over the Wyoming grasslands. The same landscape that had seemed so empty and desolate 5 years ago now felt full of possibility. His land, his home, his family. Sarah joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. She leaned against him, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the plains. 5 years, Sarah said eventually. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like 50 years. Sometimes it feels like 5 minutes. Any regrets? Jack thought about the question seriously, the way he always did when Sarah asked. He thought about the $200,000 they'd given up, about the comfortable isolation he'd lost, about all the ways his life had been completely upended. "Not a single one," he said. "You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes serious. "Jack, I need you to know something. That day on the plains, when I thought I was dying and Emma was going to be left alone, I prayed. Not for myself, but for her. I asked for someone to find her, to keep her safe." Her voice thickened with emotion. "And then you appeared. You, with your gruff manner and your careful hands and your heart that was so much bigger than you wanted anyone to know. You were the answer to my prayer." Jack's throat tightened. "I'm no saint, Sarah. I never said you were, but you're good, Jack. Good in the ways that matter. And you saved us, not just that day on the plains, but every day since. You gave us a home when we had nothing. You fought for us when we couldn't fight for ourselves. You loved us when we needed it most." She took his hands. "So thank you for showing up that day, for every day since." "Sarah." She kissed him, silencing whatever he'd been about to say. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. No arguments, just accept the gratitude. "All right." Jack pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "But for the record, you saved me too, both of you. I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to live again." They stood like that as the sun climbed higher, warming the air, burning away the morning chill. Behind them, they heard Tommy starting to fuss and Emma's sleepy voice talking to him. The sounds of family, the sounds of home. Jack thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, closed off, isolated, convinced he'd used up all his chances at happiness. That man wouldn't have recognized his life now, wouldn't have believed it possible. But that man hadn't met Sarah right, hadn't heard a child scream across the summer plains, hadn't made the choice to stop and help when he could have just kept riding. Sometimes, Jack thought, the smallest decisions changed everything. The choice to investigate a sound instead of ignoring it. The choice to help instead of turning away. The choice to open his heart instead of keeping it locked away. He'd made those choices, and they'd led him here. To this porch, this morning, this life. To Sarah and Emma and Tommy. To love and family and purpose. To home. "Come on," Sarah said, tugging his hand. "Tommy needs feeding, and Emma will want breakfast before her lessons. Life waits for no one." Jack followed her inside, into the warm chaos of family life. The door closed behind them, shutting out the vastness of the Wyoming plains. But the world outside didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of promise, full of possibility, full of all the tomorrows they'd build together. They'd started with nothing but desperation and hope, a widow and her daughter clinging to life under the merciless summer sun. They'd built a family from wreckage and grief, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. They'd faced down money and power and won, not through violence or cleverness, but through the simple, stubborn commitment to protect what mattered. And what mattered was this, the daily work of loving each other, of showing up, of choosing family over and over again. That was the victory. Not the court case or the money they'd renounced, but the ordinary miracle of breakfast and laughter and Tommy's gurgles and Emma's questions about fractions. That summer day 5 years ago, when Jack Mercer heard a child scream and chose to stop, he'd thought he was saving 2 lives. He hadn't understood that they would save him too, that rescue was something that flowed both ways, that sometimes the people you helped were the ones who helped you most. But he understood it now. And as he sat at the table with his family around him, passing plates and pouring coffee and answering Emma's endless questions, Jack Mercer knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Home. Not the place, but the people. Not the building, but the love that filled it. Not the land he owned, but the family he'd chosen and been chosen by. The summer sun rose higher outside, beginning another day's relentless heat. But inside the ranch house there was laughter and warmth and the sweet, ordinary chaos of family life. There was Emma teaching Tommy to clap. There was Sarah humming as she worked. There was Jack, no longer isolated but surrounded. No longer empty but full. There was home. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.